A Minnesota literary figure who became world famous made this observation. It's a funny thing coming home. Nothing changes. Everything looks the same, feels the same, even smells the same. You realize what's changed is you. F. Scott Fitzgerald wrote that, and in this edition of My Duluthian Life, I'm going to find out if it's true. A half dozen years in a global pandemic have gone by since I last set foot in my home state of Minnesota and Duluth, my hometown. I wonder what's changed. Like F. Scott predicted, would it just be me? I'm excited to check in on some of my favorite people, places, and things, like maybe getting to spend some time on board the Sundew, the retired Coast Guard cutter I haven't seen since 2016, last time I was home.
Okay, blow the horn here, okay?
That's the skipper, Jeff Foster, and that's his wife, Tony, at the wheel.
Midship?
Hey! Where's the midship?
The Sundew was sitting in mothballs as a Canal Park tourist attraction back in 2008. That's when Jeff and Tony, and a whole bunch of their friends, volunteered to rescue this vintage World War II Coast Guard ship and get her running again. It was a huge undertaking, but today, 80 years after the Sundew was built, right here in Duluth, she's roaming Lake Superior again.
You know, both of us grew up in Duluth, Minnesota, and Tony and I both saw this thing forever and didn't want it to go away.
It's one of the treasures of Duluth, and we didn't want it to go to the scrapyard, which is probably what might have happened to it. And it's a beautiful ship.
Now, what hits the spot after a day out in the fresh air of Lake Superior? How about having a sip of it in a fancy glass? As a crisp martini, craft distilled with that same water, right in the shadow of the aerial bridge. When it comes to making gin, vodka, aquavit, and all the other fine spirits that come to life here, using all regional ingredients, lead distiller Sarah Lee is an expert, including about how to pronounce this little distillery's brand name.
Vikre is the correct pronunciation versus Vikre or Vikre, which could be correct based on another language reference.
Is there one that would be correct in English?
People of the Bay is the translation of Vikre from Norwegian to English.
So, okay, what goes good after a sip in the Vikre cocktail tasting room? I know, Sammy's. Yeah, Sammy's. It's not just pizza, it's a slice of history. The first pizza joint in the state of Minnesota, best we know, first opened up back in the 1950s. Had anybody in Minnesota ever seen a pizza?
I don't think so. I think we were the first ones. Yeah, they were going, what's pizza, what's pizza?
That's Sammy's grandson, Tim, part of the third generation of the Perella family, still minding those ovens in the family business up on First Street.
My father tells the story. He thought pizza was just going to be a fad and come and go. Here we are today.
So, was F. Scott Fitzgerald right, after all? That it's not your hometown that changes while you're away? It's really you? Well, I'm about to find out. I'm homeward bound, this time on My Duluthian Life.
Let me tell you about my hometown, greatest in the Gopher State. I'll have to brag a little bit, but I really won't exaggerate. Big D-U-L-U-T-H, Duluth, Duluth. That's my hometown, Duluth, Duluth.
and gentlemen, in preparation for departure, please check to see that your seatbelts are securely fastened.
So I'm sitting here in 26A, and that lyric from the movie All That Jazz goes through my head. Everything old is new again. Been a while since I took this flight, or any flight for that matter. I don't know about you, but the pandemic thing kept me from going anywhere for way too long, and especially from going where I'm going today. Home. Looking out my window, the California coast drops away and the rusty red of the desert morphs into the Rocky Mountains, which morph into the flat, lush green of the Midwest, farmlands, wheat fields, and then the descent down toward all those trees and lakes. I see the Minnesota River, and then up ahead, a steep bluff. That thump of the tires on the runway gives me a little shiver. I'm home. My eyes are a little misty. No, it's probably just the allergies, from that Minnesota pollen. I need to get used to it again. Isn't that it? When it comes to travel, what's the saying? Getting there is half the fun. And getting to Duluth, for me, means getting to the Twin Cities. I still can't fly direct to Duluth from L.A. But that's okay. I spent 18 years working in Minneapolis, so the reunions are already starting. Lunches, dinners, old tribe members, mostly friends from the news and documentary days that I spent at Channel 4, WCCO. Hearing their stories now, I realize I had it right in the first place. They really are some of the most talented journalists in the business. And there's something amazing about old friends. It can be like forever since you've seen one another, and yet in 5 minutes, it's like you were never apart. Unfortunately, I can't quite say the same for the city of Minneapolis itself, though. There's a different vibe here now. My friends warned me about that when they heard I was coming. A little aside, do you remember the Mary Tyler Moore Show where she plays a reporter in Minneapolis? Who can turn the world on with her smile? The writers of that show used to come and camp out at WCCO in the newsroom, and a lot of those characters were based on real people from back when I used to work there, including Mary herself. We all thought she was based, at least partly, on our own Susan Peterson, our only female reporter at the time, in real life. Anyway, in the opening of the show, there's a corner downtown where they do a shot of Mary throwing her hat up in the air. Remember that? You're gonna make it after all. Well, there's a bronze statue of her there on that corner now, throwing that hat. But the bustling crowd of pedestrians from the old days? No. Barely a soul in sight today. The downtown looks virtually deserted. The crime rate in Minneapolis has just about doubled these past few years. And of this minute anyway, it's still going up. Now, there are lots of more dangerous cities in America, for sure. But Minneapolis has been catching up. It's still a beautiful place, but like I say, the vibe is different than it used to be. Call it a loss of innocence. So to that F. Scott observation I started out with, where my first stop on the way home is concerned, no, it really doesn't look and feel quite the same. And I really don't think it's just because what's changed is me. But enough about the cities. Yeah, I lived there, I worked there, I made some lifelong friends there. But it's not really where I'm from. No. For that, I'm going to echo something JFK famously proclaimed in a speech at the height of the Cold War when he was visiting the Berlin Wall. To paraphrase those words, Ich bin ein Duluthian. Okay, you historians, wipe that grin off your faces. It's the quintessentially perfect Minnesota day. 80 degrees with bright blue skies and those puffy white clouds. And I'm picking up this RV in St. Paul. It's a rental, not a great big thing, 24 feet long. Got a little kitchen, dinette, bathroom with a shower, and a big comfy bed. For the next 7 days, this is home sweet home. Going north on I-35. It's still really flat down here in southern Minnie. Still very green down both sides of the road. And then, yes, before you know it, the Hinckley exit. Oh, yeah. Especially if you've been away a while, you just gotta do it. The wheels just go up the exit ramp on their own toward Toby's, right? Those cinnamon rolls, still warm out of the oven. If ever there was a worthy gram of carbohydrates on this earth, a whole lot of them in this case, actually, this would be them. From here, there's more than one way to Duluth, and more scenic ones than the interstate, for sure, but there's something I want to see again and show my California travel companion for the first time, and that's the effect of coming in over Thompson Hill. You don't even know you're on a hill, right? A few twists, maybe a slight upward grade, and then you round a corner, and all of a sudden, bam, there it is. All of Duluth, the bay, the aerial bridge in the distance, and Lake Superior beyond, as far as the human eye can see. Now, there's something really cool about having an RV or camper van in Duluth, and that's where you get to park it. There's lots of places, but I'll tell you my favorite, Canal Park. It's perfectly legal to stay for 24 hours if you pay for the spaces you're taking up. I paid for 2 spaces, being a little on the long side. So now I'm right in the shadow of the aerial bridge, where hotel rooms start well up into the hundreds of dollars a night, if you can get one. I'm paying $22 for 2 spaces. Now, I'm pretty sure they don't want people living in Canal Park, but coming and going, staying some nights, hasn't raised any eyebrows. And if it was a no-no, I think they'd say so on the signs where they offer that 24-hour parking. So here we are with the front row seat, or parking space, for the attraction that brings several million visitors to Duluth every year. So, okay, quick, what's your favorite thing about Duluth? I can tell you mine with no hesitation. Lake Superior. I find that lake and the comings and goings of the ships endlessly fascinating. It just never gets old. And one of the choicest moments for me as a sailor comes along every 3 years when the tall ships come to town from all over the world. In fact, that's why I picked the timing for this trip, even though it would be a big change from years past. It was going to be held in Two Harbors, a pretty small town 25 miles up the North Shore from Duluth. I was a little apprehensive about it, like how would they handle the tourist traffic and spectator crowds? The rumors were that cars would be lined up on the road all the way back to Duluth. But come to find out, there was nothing to worry about. We just drove right in and parked and walked to the festival grounds around Agate Bay.
We're very happy to be here at Tall Ships in the sun on a beautiful day.
Just one.
The scale of the event is smaller, for sure, but thousands of people are having a great time. Not as many ships as other years, but a nice half dozen, and there's no shortage of people willing to tear themselves away from all the vendors' tents and live music to stand in line for an up-close look. But personally, my eye is drawn to another part of the harbor, the dock where the Edna G, the old steam tug, stays tied up, and then right next to her, the Sundew, the beautiful 180-foot U.S. Coast Guard cutter that served 60 years on the Great Lakes before she was decommissioned back in 2004. Now, that tug hasn't run in decades. She's idle for life. But the Sundew, she's anything but idle these days, and the how and why of it makes a pretty interesting story. It all started 1943. That's when Marine Iron and Shipbuilding began work on the Sundew. World War II was raging, and the twin ports, Duluth and Superior, were bustling. Had half a dozen different shipyards building and launching over 200 vessels of 10 different types. Among them were 38 ships just like the Sundew, 180 feet long, each named for a plant. There was the cactus, the woodbine, the basswood, the woodrush, and so on. The Sundew is actually a carnivorous plant native to Australia that lives by attracting and digesting insects and other small prey. That is, of course, not what the ship Sundew was made to do, however. No. Having been built during World War II, she was originally fitted with 20mm guns, a 3-inch cannon, and depth charges, all since removed. As much fun as they might still be around the 4th of July, huh? The Sundew actually had 3 main missions. 1, taking care of buoys and aids to navigation, which have to be hauled out and put back in place to prevent ice damage in the winter. It might sound easy, but keep in mind, these markers are put there to warn of dangerous surrounding waters, and they have to be moved in the least hospitable of seasons. Secondly, these ships are icebreakers. They're designed to be driven up onto the edges of ice floes and break them with their weight. Finally, these are what the Coast Guard used for search and rescue when the weather goes to hell and somebody is in trouble out there. So, just when any sane skipper would want to be in a safe harbor, the captain of the Sundew needed to be ready to go out there. In fact, it was the Sundew that rescued survivors of the freighter Carl Bradley when it sank in a November gale back in 1959. So, you might be able to guess, these are some real tough boats. Tough as they may be, however, there's not many left. Out of the Sundew's 38 sister ships built in Duluth, there might be 2 or 3 still left running somewhere. One of them is even rumored to be operating off the coast of Africa, of all places. When the Sundew was retired in 2004, the Coast Guard donated her to the city of Duluth, her home port. She was docked in Canal Park as a museum ship, and there she sat until the '08 recession set in. Tourism dropped off, so the city decided to put her up for sale, $100,000, almost exactly the value of the 25,000 gallons of fuel in her tanks. The offer sparked the imagination of one Jeff Foster, Duluth native and owner of the trucking company that bears his name. I had a chance to catch up with Jeff during a little breather from hosting tours in 2 harbors, and he told me about falling in love with the Sundew.
I just grabbed a dear friend of mine who was an engineer, and we came over, and at the Sundew, we got on the ship and walked around. I was just amazed by it. It is a Duluth treasure, actually, because it was built in Duluth. The Wood Rush, which was predecessor to it, was built in Duluth, which was the exact same boat. So for all those years between the Wood Rush and the Sundew, it looked like the same ship, just different name. And it was the men and the women of Duluth and Superior, northern Minnesota and northern Wisconsin that built it during the war years, because it was built in 1944. So I'm learning all this stuff after looking at it and seeing what an amazing ship it was and understanding it a little bit more. Then Tony and I had a conversation about it.
Yep, Tony. That would be Tony Fladmark, Jeff's wife. And that conversation started out very much along the same lines as countless spousal interactions down through the ages, when the topic turns to buying a boat.
The first conversation was probably not as positive as you might imagine. I was not in favor of buying. No, for the record, I love the Sundew as much as Jeff, maybe even more. I love this ship. But at that time, we were so busy. And I looked at Jeff and I said, how in the world can we possibly add a ship that large into our busy schedule? How is that going to work? And, to his credit, he said, volunteers. He said, we can do it with volunteers. And I almost didn't believe him at the time. But the truth is, people have come to this ship to help save this ship, to scrape, to paint, to rebuild all the damaged systems, to turn the ship into a living, breathing, working ship. And it has been amazing. It has been humbling. They are now some of our best friends. It's like family. So it has turned into one of the big, wonderful things of our life.
The Sundew started taking on a life of her own, a new life. Jeff and Tony and all the dozens of volunteers that shared the dream spent the better part of a year getting her out of mothballs and ready to go back out on Lake Superior. There are pictures hanging in the wardroom that capture the incredible sense of excitement and accomplishment.
The picture I like to point out is when the Sundew became a museum ship. There's a picture of the tug backing the Sundew into what would become, her final resting place as a museum ship. This is going to be her final berth. In essence, I think of it as her graveyard, because she was going to be there as a museum ship till she could no longer be a museum ship. Then I point to the next picture and I said, and you see, here's a picture of the Sundew coming out of the Blue Bridge in Duluth Harbor. I said, this is the Sundew after we worked on her all this time, and she's coming out of what was supposed to be her final resting place, her graveyard, and she's coming out under her own power.
The Sundew went on to become one of Lake Superior's most celebrated attractions. For years, she's been one of the welcoming escorts for the tall ships when they arrived for the parade of sail, right past Canal Park and under the bridge into the harbor. I've had the great fortune to be on board the Sundew for that myself a couple times. It's hard to describe the feelings she stirs up, the curiosity, the sense of reverence among all these people. Now waiting in line at the Festival of Sail in Two Harbors just for a chance to step aboard.
People are so, they love the tour so much. They love hearing about the history of the Sundew. There have been times when I came around the corner and said, okay, now I'm going to hand you off to, so-and-so. And they start clapping. They're so happy to have learned something about the Sundew and this little piece of history.
That heartfelt expression of, hey, thank you for keeping this boat alive. And that's powerful.
Jeff and Tony have made the Sundew more than just a tourist attraction, though. She's become a working member of the community in ways even her crew could never have imagined.
We work with a lot of the different law enforcement agencies in town. So the Coast Guard has practiced different drills on the ship. They do like hostile boarding. So as if, so that was so interesting because they came alongside of the ship, threw up grapple hooks while we're underway, trying to get on the ship and take over as if it was a hostile ship. So it was a great training exercise for them. And I always think it's kind of funny because sometimes we do these things right in the middle of the Duluth Harbor. And I wonder, do people think that we're trying to get away from all this law enforcement? But no, it's really fun. We work with them. We're happy to have the ship serve in that capacity for those kinds of training events.
It's been more than a decade since the Sundew came out of retirement and took up such a big place in the lives of the people who love her. I had to ask, what's the biggest kick of all?
For me, it's all the crew members and the volunteers that we have who have become our best friends and just a wonderful group of people. But I have to say the second best thing is just being out on the lake, the breeze blowing through the bridge. I love being at the wheel, going through the aerial lift bridge and looking at the open lake in front of you, and it's like an adventure waiting to happen.
And I echo that, the relationships. It's amazing, the people that we've met and people who continue to meet.
The Sundew, it's pretty close to 80 years old now. I have to wonder, can the Sundew live forever? How long can this ship go on?
Oh, I don't know. It'll be in a freshwater vessel as it is. It can go on as long as we take care of it. I don't know. That's a great question. We hope it goes on for, a good long while.
I think the ship will last for a very long time. One, because so many people care about it. It's an icon of the Duluth Harbor, and it's a really cool ship. And the other part is that it was built really well. It's a well-built ship. It was built in 1944. It was built, as Jeff alluded before, by the men and women of Duluth, because this was post-war, during World War II, and it was built by Rosie the Riveter. And we actually had a woman come on board whose mother helped do the rivets on this ship, which is very interesting.
Wow.
And what I always say to people, they go, wow, the Sundew is really in good shape for being so old. Well, one reason I always say is because it was in freshwater, and the other reason is because it was built by women. That's why it's still in really good shape.
Back in town, I have to almost pinch myself again to take in the reality of what's happened along the bay since my years growing up here. This used to be Duluth's armpit. Grimy factories, rusty junkyards, abandoned warehouses. I don't know if Duluth even has an armpit anymore, but if so, it's nowhere around here. Cozy eateries, upscale hotels, craft breweries. And now, even a craft distillery, the only one in town, right there in the same building that used to house Geno's, the frozen pizza rolls and Chongqing Chinese food in a can. So, curiosity is grabbing me. What's a craft distillery? I have to check this out. The first thing I had to learn is how to pronounce the name of the place.
Vikre is the correct pronunciation.
That's Sarah Lee. No relation, I don't think.
People of the Bay is the translation of Vikre from Norwegian to English.
She's the lead distiller at Vikre.
Because our ownership is Norwegian, Vikre is the correct pronunciation versus Vikre or Vikre, which could be correct based on another language reference.
And the owners are really Norwegian American, not people in Norway. In fact, Emily Vikre is actually a native Duluthian. Her husband, Joel, a self-described medical school dropout, and wife, Emily, an established food and drink writer, were working at their desks on the East Coast about a decade ago. One evening, over a sip of exceptional Scandinavian whiskey, they were struck with an idea.
They were drinking whiskey from another country that really declares itself to have extremely clean water and really healthy, sustainably grown grains and healthy, sustainably grown wood for barrels. And Joel and Emily said, well, wait a minute. Minnesota, specifically where Emily's from, here in Duluth, has all of those same things. And they said, well, this is what we should do. We should leave our community outside of Boston, and we should move to the Midwest and start a distillery.
If that makes it sound simple, bear in mind, it's not. They had to find a place of business, get financial backing, and acquire all this equipment.
It takes a long time to take a 100-plus-year-old building and retrofit it with the electricity, the air turnover, the plumbing, the fire suppression to get a distillery up and running. Obviously, equipment plays a part of that. And recipe development takes a very long time.
I've actually tasted a few of those recipes, but now, just for the record, nobody's paying me to say any of this, and I've personally paid for whatever I've sampled. Vikre has started making canned cocktails now, and they're developing some whiskeys too. But the longtime mainstays of the business revolve around their vodka, plus 2 kinds of aquavit, and 3 different kinds of gin, flavored with native Minnesota evergreens. There's juniper, which is the closest to the traditional gin flavor you might think of, and then they also do a spruce and a very mild, mellow cedar gin, too. But one of the most important ingredients of all, like they say, it's the water. When I taste that gin, I swear I can taste Lake Superior.
Is that a compliment or an insult?
It is definitely. I'm a Duluth boy. What do you think?
Some people are like, oh, Lake Superior. Ooh, is that like fish?
It's the best.
Definitely not. It has the same mineral composition as water from Pilsen. So it's a very clean, mineral-free water that we are very, very happy to utilize, and happy that we have such a clean, mineral-free water.
Having that water is great. But it's just the beginning. It all starts out in one of Vikre's huge stainless steel tanks, where they warm up a 1,000-gallon mixture at a time. It'll include some wheat, barley, corn, and yeast. That has to ferment for a while before it gets piped over to a still. Vikre has a couple of stills, custom built to order, by hand in Kentucky. Their biggest still stands a good 10 feet tall and looks like something out of a Jules Verne science fiction, a work of functional art in gleaming copper.
And the copper is important because it really pulls and holds away a ton of undesirable compounds will attach to the copper. Through the miracles of chemistry, the copper is helping to clean up the alcohol as we go along.
I wasn't able to visit during an active run, but I'm told there's really not a whole lot more that you can see or even hear. Just some whooshes, maybe a little hissing. So there, you get the idea. Now, the still heats up the fermented mixture and condenses it into hard liquor. But the real magic is all about the fine points, and it gets pretty technical, like how the flavors get added along the way. Sarah leads me over to a row of huge glass jars with signs that say what's inside. I see lavender, ginger root, all these big jars.
All of these jars go into one or more of the gins that we produce.
Wow.
You know, and there's obviously juniper berries in all of them, which are stored in the much larger bins down here.
Bins, yeah.
All of them also contain coriander. And then depending on which gin we're making, any number of these botanicals can be included.
The maze of rooms and jars and hallways with huge sacks of ingredients go on. And then we get to the bottling and canning operation. To be a real craft distillery, you have to do that on your premises. It's a rule. Vikre will stack up about 1,000+ finished cases, 12 bottles in a case, for pickup by their distributor. That's every month. Now, that puts Vikre right around the middle end of mid-sized as these boutique distilleries go. Craft distilling is growing by leaps and bounds all over the country. But just for a sense of scale, all the craft distilleries in the U.S. put together still account for well under 10% of the country's total U.S. production of liquor. So, I think I should step out onto Vikre's cocktail patio. It's a beautiful day. I'll have a look at the menu and do my small part to support Duluth's only distillery with a little sip of Lake Superior. Let's see. Maybe a boozy summer slushy? Here's a Northland Mule. Or, the Bayside Hard Lemonade. Yep. Lake Superior. It's still my favorite thing about Duluth. A trip home is such a trip. Back in time, driving slowly past the old family house. Hasn't changed much. Stopping to smell the woods along the creek where I used to play, Chester Creek. Seeing the hockey rink where I learned to skate. The corner store where I bought popsicles and penny candy. I drive past my old Catholic grade school where the nuns carefully taught us about the sanctity of all life. While just outside the classroom window, we watched the parish priest with a pellet rifle shooting pigeons out of the bell tower. That really was an education. But now I'm getting hungry. I've gotten so many recommendations about so many great sounding spots, but they seem so new. And this was a nostalgia tour for me. I'd already had the great walleye dinner at the Pickwick, pan-seared, so I'm thinking, let's go simple. Like pizza. I love a good pizza. Like, who doesn't? And I also love a good story. Well, Duluth has both under one roof. It all started not long after World War II in a small cafe in Keewatin, up on the range. It was owned by Sam and Louise Perella. Sam used to be a miner before they opened the cafe. Well, it seems their clientele included some young war veterans who'd served in Europe and Italy in particular. They raved about a certain dish that just about nobody in Keewatin or anywhere else in northern Minnesota, for that matter, had ever heard of. But, as luck would have it, Sam had some connections in Chicago. Embarking on a little adventure to the Windy City, Sam went sniffing around, I guess you could say literally, for a restaurant that served pizza. Soon enough, Sam got into a kitchen where they showed him all about it. Coming home on the range, how can I resist? Sam and Louise took the next couple years perfecting their recipe, and in 1954, they opened the first Sammy's Pizza restaurant in Hibbing, Minnesota. Best we know, it was the first pizza joint in the whole state of Minnesota, and it sparked a sensation. Pedestrians peering in through the front windows as Sammy spun that pizza dough high in the air, something they'd never even seen before. Two years later, 1956, the Perella family opens the first pizza parlor in Duluth, right there on First Street, which is where I met Sammy's grandson, Tim, a guy about my age, cutting pizzas at the front counter.
Yeah, we always cut them in squares. That's the way we've done it from day one.
Day one was more than 65 years ago.
There was nights down here after my dad had been open for a couple of years. He'd have a cop at the door, let three people out, and they were lined up out around the corner. You had to come in.
Oh my God!
Yeah, and it was like that for years. Yeah, they were going, "What's pizza? What's pizza?" And they came in, and here we are today.
Now, I happen to know a little of this history firsthand. In fact, the first time I ever tasted pizza as a little kid, it was from Sammy's. My uncle lived just up the hill from here. He was the pastor of Sacred Heart Cathedral on 4th Street, and a family tradition was born when Father Jim, as we called him, my uncle, made a practice of showing up at our door with a couple boxes of Sammy's pizzas. Little did we know, our very first taste of pizza was going to be one of the very best.
I start in the morning. We make the dough every day fresh. Let it rise. By 4 o'clock, it's already rose once. Then I roll the dough balls. Then after I roll the dough balls, they will raise again. It's the second time. So our dough is made daily fresh.
What's the story with throwing the pizza up in the air? What's that about?
It is when the dough ball makes a circle spin there, then it gets bigger.
So you're actually making
the dough ball. You're making the pizza bigger when you're throwing it up.
And then a little thinner maybe too, right?
It's going to get thinner too.
Yeah.
Me personally, my pizza is the best when it's a thin crust. That's what we're noted for.
On top of that crust goes the family sauce recipe and whatever else you ordered. Sausage and pepperoni are the big favorites, all put together by hand and baked by Tim himself. 10 or 12 minutes at 525. What comes out of that oven brings customers and longtime friends back time and again often stopping to chat with Tim like members of the family.
My mother worked here for your dad in, 1956, 57? So I've been coming to the Sammy since 1956. You know, I went to the old Central High School. You know, I mean, right up the hill. I mean, we all hung out. It was just, kids all came after games. It was wonderful. You know, these guys were at the top of their game in 1956, you know, in 54 when they opened. It hasn't changed.
And it's not just locals stopping in for their Sammy's fix. A couple booths down, we get an earful about that.
We are from Duluth, okay. Diane and I, but we live in California right now, and we just love it. It's just a great pizza. It's just, you know, the best that we've ever had, you know.
And you're all the way from California, so you've got something to compare it to.
That's true. You know,
we order them, and we have them sent frozen.
Frozen to us.
They come 10 at a time, and we get them about 4 or 5 times a year.
That's fabulous.
Yeah.
Oh, does it feel a little bit like a way to come back to Duluth a little?
Yeah.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. It's just we wouldn't you know come here without coming to Sammy's and enjoying the food. So
it's something the waitstaff has gotten used to hearing all the time.
I get very similar stories from multiple people multiple days. I just had a family of 18 that none of them live in Duluth anymore, and they all came back at the same time to come to Sammy's. So it was really cool.
They sell about 250 pizzas a day out of their original Duluth location, but the Perellas have built something of a family dynasty now. 4 Sammys just in Duluth, and 18 more spread out around Minnesota and the surrounding states, winning top awards year after year for best pizza, and all run and staffed by the Perella kids, cousins, uncles, nephews, going on 4 generations now. I doubt there are very many jobs in this world a family can do their whole life and still feel the way Tim Perella feels about his.
I've been grateful to do this all my life so far. I've done this all my life, and I still love coming to work every day. I'm grateful, and I wouldn't change it for nothing.
My last night in Minnesota, I was treated to something rare back in California. The sound of rain on the roof of the RV. A little kiss goodbye for a native son. As for F. Scott Fitzgerald's observations about coming home, whether it's your home that changes or just you, I'd say it was actually a little of both. But for sure, what changes I saw about Duluth were, if anything, very much for the better.
Duluth, Duluth, that's my hometown. Duluth, Duluth, that's my hometown.
My Duluthian Life with Jim Hayden is produced monthly by Planet Pictures Media. You can listen wherever you get your podcasts.